you met Henry Hathaway, who directed True Grit and Niagara and Nevada Smith, and he said to you, and I'm curious. It seems like this really stuck with you. Never let them see your fear, your indecisiveness.
Right. He just said, "Let me give you a piece of advice before you go off to shoot your fish movie." He called it the fish movie. He said it. I know it's there's a book out, and I know it's the fish book, and you're making the fish movie, but just remember one thing. He said, if you have any doubts about a shot or about something you want to tell the crew, and you don't quite know what to say, figure really fast what to say and say anything, because you cannot. The second you show weakness, they're going to swamp you. And I remember that, him saying that. You're just going to swamp you.
How do you show confidence and be a good leader when you yourself are still learning and lacking in experience? Everyone has to start somewhere, right? Everyone starts knowing nothing and then must learn. So how do you become a good leader when you feel like you're not ready? Well, the good thing is every great leader started here, right? And when it comes to filmmaking, the best example that we can look at, or one of them, is Steven Spielberg. Now, just some context. Steven Spielberg started directing when he was 22 years old. His first professional gig was directing the legendary actress Joan Crawford and the writer, actor, and creator of The Twilight Zone, Rod Serling, in NBC's Night Gallery.
Today we begin an exclusive three-part conversation with Steven Spielberg. I began by asking him about his very first professional assignment.
For Night Gallery, it was a trilogy, and I was going to direct the second middle segment with Joan Crawford being the star. And I remember going over to Joan's house, and she just assumed that Universal had hired a substantial, professional, veteran director to direct her, someone of her stature. She assumed they were going to match someone like George Cukor, for instance. I think she expected someone like Cukor to take over the reins and direct her. And I remember she had no idea that I was 21 years old at the time. Nobody had told her that I was 21. Big mistake. And I walked into this room, and then she looked at me, and she almost screamed. She said, "My God, we can't go out for dinner. People will think you're my son."
So think about it. At 22 years old, he's directing Joan Crawford.
You said that you were grateful to her because she treated you as if you knew what you were doing when you probably didn't.
I did not know what I was doing half the time because it was intimidating. I had never worked with a crew that size before.
So with that in mind, let's unravel a little bit of how Steven Spielberg has exemplified true leadership qualities time and time again. And the 3 points of true leadership, I believe, are humility/character, confidence, and communication. And he did all of this from a very young age. But of course, he had to learn along the way. So let's go back 6 or 7 years after his first directing gig for NBC, when he was directing a film that you've probably heard of. It's called Jaws. At this time, Spielberg was still learning. He was still new at this. 6 or 7 years may sound like a lot of time, but it's not when you're trying to learn the most complicated art form that's ever existed, besides maybe video games. I don't know. Movies are pretty damn complicated. And at this point, Spielberg had already directed a couple of feature films. Duel, it's a great movie, Hitchcockian, it's awesome, check it out. Before that, he directed Amblin and a couple others. So he had experience directing feature films, he had experience directing TV, that's for sure, and yet Jaws was an incredible challenge for him. A lot of this was because he was pushing the boundaries of what was possible. He was doing things with visual effects, and he was risking failure. Spielberg was at the edge of failure. He could have failed. We may have never heard about him ever again if Jaws bombed. And it was very likely that it would bomb. So being on the edge of failure and even failing is okay. The greats have all failed in different ways. So if you really want to model Spielberg, maybe you want to go on the edge a bit.
You cannot. The second you show weakness, they're going to swamp you. And I remember that, him saying that. You're just going to swamp you.
So what's the first thing that we can take away right out of the gate from this quote? Keep it to yourself. That's the first point. Keep it to yourself. What do I mean by that? If you feel insecure, if you feel fear, if you feel neuroticism, if you feel negative emotions, right? That if you feel like you're going to fail completely and fall on your face, you as a leader must be able to keep it to yourself. You have to be able to hold in those negative feelings. And the reason is everyone in the crew is looking to you. And they're all looking to you for direction. If you show any sort of indecisiveness. And Henry Hathaway was a master director, and Steven Spielberg is repeating this quote as a master director. So it may sound extreme, and it may sound like toxic masculinity or whatever the internet calls these kinds of things. But the fact is, you can't risk showing insecurity when you're leading. A leader must be able to keep a lot of things to him or herself. And there are certain things that you just can only tell maybe to a few confidants. And that's a skill that has to be learned, and it's a skill that takes time to develop, and it's not natural for many people. So one tip for this is just develop your poker face. Sometimes it's not good to just be totally transparent that people know exactly what you're thinking. If someone comes to you with a problem on set, like, hey, this light ran out of battery, or the camera isn't turning on, or something really scary like that, you have to be able to listen, nod your head, say thank you, keep your cool, and say, okay, let's figure this out, right? Don't reveal the fact that on the inside you're screaming your head off. If once you do that, everyone else is going to go, okay, so the man leading the ship is freaking out and getting on a lifeboat. I probably should get on a lifeboat too and abandon the ship before it sinks and I die with it. So you're the figurehead. You must have that poker face at times. A poker face often, I think, just references like a totally dead, emotionless face. I'm talking about kind of the opposite, keeping a positive and enthusiastic attitude on set.
Are you people insane? I'm the director.
So someone comes to you about something, you should be like, thank you for telling me that. That's very important. Are you okay? How are you feeling? Let's figure this out. I understand. Positive things. You have to reinforce positive energy, because once you start saying negative things, it escalates and it exponentially grows. And before you know it, everyone's going to be negative about everything, and everyone's going to be complaining. You're going to steer the ship. If you're negative about things, people will be negative. If you're positive about things, people will be positive. And that sort of enthusiasm goes a long way. People will want to follow you.
Figure really fast what to say and say anything.
All right, the second point is to improvise. I love how within this very short quote, Henry Hathaway says, figure out what to say really fast and say anything. It's basically telling you to improvise, make up things. If you don't know what the answer is, sometimes it's best to come up with an answer on the spot. And you're not lying to someone, you're the boss. If you're leading, people are coming to you for direction and they're coming to you for approval. Don't sit there and go, I don't know, let me think about this. I'll talk to you in an hour. They can't wait an hour often, especially on a set. Sometimes it's better to just say, okay, move the flag over there. Yeah, keep the light there. Let's switch out the dolly and change it to a gimbal. Frankly, sometimes you're just not going to know what to say.
You know anything about the art of film production?
Well, I like to think so.
Sometimes you just need to think of those things on the spot. I think spontaneous thinking and being able to think on your toes is like one of the number one keys to being a successful filmmaker. You are going to encounter so many problems. And Steven Spielberg on the set of Jaws, watch the behind the scenes, he experienced so many issues along the way. He had to think on his toes probably every few minutes, making pivotal decisions that could mean the success or failure of his entire production.
No, it doesn't come easily. I don't even think about it. If I thought about multi-million-dollar pictures and all the equipment and all the responsibility, I'd probably go bananas.
Everyone on set is looking to you as the director. They're all looking to you. So it's going to weigh you down. It's going to be intense. And for some people, especially that aren't ready for that, it's going to get into their psyche and it's going to influence the words that you speak. So it's really important to think about what you say before you say it. Take your time, be slow to anger, slow to speak, listen to people, and really engage with everyone. Give them eye contact, see how they're doing. And all these little things are going to take you a long way. It's going to allow you to have really successful relationships with different people on set. And people are going to be happier and they're going to trust you. You're building trust when you do things like this. When a crew goes through difficulty, which is inevitable, if the director is able to keep his or her cool on set, people are going to automatically trust that person because they're going to go, that person held it together amidst all these difficulties. Just a quick example that may help you with this concept is something I learned when I was learning classical guitar I was like in middle school, and it was a really good experience. But my teacher would tell me, always play to your foot tapping. So tap your foot when you're playing And as long as you could keep your foot tapping and you could keep your notes in sync with the tempo, then no one will know you really made a mistake. And he taught me that tempo, keeping the tempo is more important than keeping the notes. You can miss half the notes, but if you keep the tempo, it's likely that the audience may not even notice that you missed the notes because you've kept the pace. And I think of that as a perfect analogy for leading a crew. Keep the pace. If someone's coming to you with a problem, like let's say a missed note on the guitar when you're playing, and you miss the note, well, don't stop. Don't stutter. Don't allow your thought process, your tempo, your rhythm, the rhythm of the whole crew in operation to be stopped and halted. Keep it going. There's a mistake. Well, here's my tempo. Here's my rhythm. Here's the answer. Here's the solution. Okay, let's keep moving. All right, set the cameras. Let's go. Actors, are you ready? Is everybody feeling good, right? You have to keep that rhythm of the set. That's the momentum. The minute you stop and go, wait, okay, let's think about this, right? The minute you do that, the whole production is immediately shifted. The momentum's lost. And like the audience listening to the musician who stops in the middle of their piece to go back to fix the note, they're going to know that something's wrong.
The second you show weakness, they're going to swamp you.
All right, the last point is don't show weakness. Now, weakness could be seen as all the other things that I've talked about, but I think that it deserves its own point. Steven Spielberg even said that like the crew wasn't the problem. The crew was great and there weren't issues with the crew. It was all the shark. So that goes to show that an experienced director like Spielberg was, even though he was in his 20s with Jaws, can still run into things that they did not foresee. They may have a great crew, they may have everything working well, but there could be that one element that just trips you up. So it doesn't really matter how well everything's going. It's likely you're going to end up with a Bruce or the shark, the mechanical shark from Jaws, and you're going to have an issue that you did not foresee. And that is where your weakness will show through. Your weaknesses are the parts of your production that are not thought out, that are not completely polished. And they're the weaknesses of your production that can be poked and can cause, it's like the leak in your boat. Those are your weaknesses that you have to find a way to patch up. And the minute you show them and just expose them, it can cause worse damage because now it's flooding even more and your boat's going to sink. And related to this, like one of the weaknesses that Spielberg was experiencing was that everyone wanted to go home. It was originally supposed to be a 58-day schedule, and it went up to 78 days, according to Spielberg in this interview. So we're talking about more than 2 weeks being added to the shoot, meaning all of the crew had to stay out in the ocean, in the cold, and they were uncomfortable. So Spielberg had the choice of just compromising on his vision and ending up with something that was subpar, or pushing through and making his film. And what I'm getting at is you're going to have to make people uncomfortable sometimes. And that is really hard, especially as a good leader. Your goal is to make everyone feel comfortable and everyone feel happy and part of the experience. But there are those times, those moments where you're going to have to make the decision. As the leader, you know what? This is going to make people uncomfortable. This may cause, like in war, this may cause some death, and I may lose some troops because of this. And of course, it's not that extreme when you're making a movie, but for the analogy's sake, I may lose some troops because I need to push forward to the goal, which is winning the war. You may take some loss. You may have to make people uncomfortable at points. And of course, never ever violate anyone's personal rights or their boundaries. But if everyone's willing to go with you, if you've been a good leader up until this point, most people are willing to say, you know what, I'm willing to be uncomfortable for this because this leader knows what they're doing. I can trust them, and there's someone that I want to follow because I believe in their vision. If you've applied everything before this point in the video, up until this point that you have to make people uncomfortable, they're going to be willing to do it for you. And especially if you're an independent filmmaker, this is essential. You have to be able to ask people to be uncomfortable to make a cheap, zero-budget independent film. It's just inevitable that it's going to happen. And your leadership qualities are where this will die if you do not have good leadership qualities. If you do not have that humility, if you don't have the communication skills, and you don't have the confidence, this will not work out. And your film will never get finished. It sucks, but it won't. All right, so finally, I'm going to just backtrack on everything I just said by showing this quote from Spielberg saying that he showed insecurity. So just listen to this.
And it turned out that I showed a lot of insecurity. I showed a lot of doubt.
Now listen to this quote from Raiders of the Lost Ark. When he was filming Raiders of the Lost Ark, this is what Steven Spielberg said.
There's a moment in every film, many moments, maybe several hundred moments, where you think you've got the biggest hit of the century. And other moments where you think you're going to walk away embarrassed from this and never be able to live it down. And those feelings sometimes occur within an hour of each other, or within a day, or sometimes they just are pulling you and pushing you during the editing process. You know, a success breeds 1,000 parents, you know, and a failure is an orphan.
Not to say everything I've said before this is meaningless, but you're going to make mistakes. You're going to show weakness, and it's just going to happen. You're going to doubt your film. You're going to reveal maybe that you're not confident at times, and that's just inevitable. You can't take this advice and as if it's you know, the way to do things. And another thing is showing your weakness, showing your vulnerability can actually allow people to trust you more because you're being honest and you're being upfront. Telling someone, hey, you know what? I'm really stressed out. This is really hard and I'm really struggling. That can actually build bonds and people will step up and help you in ways that you never thought they would. So it's good to be open and communicative about where you're at. And I think this comes into play, especially when you have a small circle. You need to have your producer or writer or lead actor, the people that you're really working super close with. These are the people that are your confidants. These are the people that you can confide in and say, hey, this is where I'm at. So I'd suggest have that circle of communication. Don't hold back from sharing with them if you're on an equal playing field. But when it comes to your crew, when it comes to the actors on set, when it comes to professional relationships like the managers of the locations and things like that, just don't show weakness and don't let them know where you're at. I really recommend that. Keep it to yourself. And so it's all a balancing act. That's what I'm getting at. You can't just take this black or white. Relationships are never black and white. And it's good to look at the relationships as a whole and the production as a whole and go, okay, where do I need to show my struggles? Where do I need to show my strengths? Right? And that's all part of being human. You're going to make mistakes and things aren't going to go well all the time. And that's what this is all about. Being a good leader is not about controlling everything and making it all happen exactly the way you want it. Being a good leader is more about being serving others, putting others before yourself, and being humble. You need to exalt others above you. That's the goal of the leader. The person who does that the most is the person that people most trust and most want to follow. And so I hope that this helped. I hope that this spoke to you in a personal way and that you'll be able to apply it to your own films or whatever else you're going out there to make. This channel is about the creative process and it's about helping myself and those listening and communicating with me becoming better artists with more output. So I hope to see you in the next video and thank you so much for taking the time to watch this.